I remember him sitting right in front of me and looking me in the eyes and explaining to me very coolly exactly how he was planning to kill me one day. I was just 2 or 3 years old. I've always tried to avoid the temptation to make art because inevitably you wind up trying to reproduce in some way the art that you have seen. I believe enormously in authenticity, and I think there is a natural line from authenticity to art and an almost impossible line the other way round. To go through art to find authenticity is a much more difficult road, I believe. Authenticity and congruency have been incredibly important to me, and I've wanted to have a sort of straight line between my experience as a human being and my art. My father met my mother in a pub in the London Arsenal town where I was later born. He was very handsome in his merchant navy uniform, deeply tanned and very proud and aloof, but actually too afraid to approach my mother. So he sent a friend over to her to tell her that he liked her looks. They moved into my great-aunt Violet's house with damp peeling walls, gaslight, no electricity, and everything painted brown. My dad became a commercial plumber in the City of London. Now, I remember around 9 years old, I was in his workshop, this huge, dark, Victorian shambles, and he was on his hands and knees on the floor, blinking smoke out of his eyes, making my first painting easel. But after that day in his workshop, he never mentioned my art again. Not once. We chose the place because the doors were very slightly higher than the other houses, and the ceilings were slightly higher. Cottages in Devon tend to have low ceilings, which really doesn't work for paintings like this. This is where it all goes on. It's a tiny studio, but it works. And it becomes such haven, sort of an oasis. This is my oasis. I suppose really it's a room in a sense that I'm never in, because when I'm in it, I'm completely in my own mind. So it's not a room I ever look at. Although my life, completely all my feelings, find their way into my paintings, I've never seen my art as narrative or biographical, not in the least. It tells no story. It's purely visual, but it has long roots. And I want the roots of it to pass down into my life and feed the art such that every square inch of this connected past, it's delivered into every tiny patch of the paintings, so that the paintings are as living as a genuinely honest diary is, at least, the real substance of a human life. It was a Saturday, late morning, and I was maybe 10 years old. My mother was at work and my dad was sitting, stripped to the waist in the kitchen. He started by casually asking me whether I was clean, which confused me. He asked me to wait and then come up into the upstairs bathroom. And that was the first of many times that he had sex with me. I took up crying and occasionally fainting. But between these episodes, inexplicably, I was a happy boy. I would write and draw endlessly in my room when I could get away with it, lost, maybe deliberately, in this delightful world of ideas. Visions, really, and in a kind of wonderful euphoria, which never really ended. My whole life I painted flesh. I tried a million different ways of doing that. But in this collection that started a little over 3 years ago, I wanted something very specific. I wanted a kind of starved, theological somehow atmosphere, very visceral, very mortal. And I was in the National Gallery in London and came across the Ansidei Madonna, Raphael, and the flesh was absolutely exquisite. Verdaccio is kind of an undercoat. It's basically black, white, and yellow, but specific black, white, and yellow pigments mixed together. Now, that is the undercoat. I studied it and tubed it, in actual fact. So here we have a lot of Raphael's Verdaccio colour. And you can see all that is then added, all that is added in terms of veins and imperfections, and the blood in the ear, and the lemon of bones coming close to the surface of the skin. All that is added, the end result being to have a sense of living bracketed between birth and death. Because I feel that we do live bracketed by birth and death, and with a mortal body, and that is the way it is. And I think the function of artists is to simply show what is, not an advertising campaign, not any kind of didactic, diatribe, just the truth of who we are. It's good. Every design for every painting begins only in words and stays in words for the longest time. Because in that form, the idea is as fluid as it can be. It is like shaping smoke in the air. It keeps the idea quickly moved, quickly adjusted, and fluid, liquid, really. Every painting design then goes to tiny pictures, really little drawings. I learned this when I was painting murals. I painted 25 multi-story murals, was worried about designing them, and I just went up the street and looked back at the mural and discovered that a 6-story building from just down the street is the size of a postcard. That is the size at which it will be seen. So if I design a 6-story building the size of a postcard, when you're driving past it, it will make sense. So that was what I did. Then I enlarged them and filled in the detail. I do the same with every painting. I start with a really tiny drawing so that I can only deal with the biggest elements of it in their relation to the edges of the painting. And it slowly expands and expands, but always surrounded with writing, where I have arrows going to every object, talking about the atmosphere, the emotion of that, how it looks, why it's there, what kind of metaphor it is, feeling things in that really have no explanation, but which need to be there. And it is progressively shaped in that way through to a working drawing, and then through the painting process. All of those notes are in there as well. It's all in there. It's a diary of the whole thing. I was walking out of the presentation of a public mural I'd done in Wales when a porter stopped me. Apparently my mother was calling to tell me that my father was dying. Within a day I was on their boat on a lake in the north of England, grey skies, and the sound of moorhens calling across the water, and my dad within days of his death, sitting in the cockpit of his boat, smoking and looking just wretched. I told him, look, Dad, if there's anything you need, anything, just tell me and I'll get it for you. He told me he wanted 6 bullets for his service revolver. I was stunned and assumed, well, I can understand that you've had enough. And he said, oh no, they're for you and your mother. If there's a chair in a painting, then I've designed a kind of chair that I see in my mind. We then have to find it, finish it, age it, distress it. What I have to do is reproduce the thing that was in my mind. It's a stage set, basically. And everything is that way. Everything is made. If it's in a painting, it's made. And so you have to learn, how to do a little bit of origami and another kind of bird, because they are in paintings as well. And then I needed photographs, so I took old family photographs of mine, reprinted them, and then folded and distressed them. These are all 6 months old, these photographs, but they're made to look like they've been in a family forever, because I needed them thoroughly messed up for one painting. So for every painting, you have to make it all. You have to just, everything that's in the painting has got to be made. And the reason is that it carries an emotional charge. There is a charge that if you don't get the surfaces right, the objects right, the clothing precisely right, every finger, every square inch conveys an emotional charge. And if it's done in a sloppy kind of way, well, then you have a sloppy kind of emotional result in the painting. That's just what it is, isn't it? You just have to do that right. It's just about touching your earlobe.
Cool. Okay.
And because my father always said to me, you're a woman, that was his idea of an insult. So I always use female models. I almost never use a male model for my paintings. Sometimes when I want a particular kind of woman, I will use a man for the woman, but I always use women to represent men. Put them in men's suits and so forth. When they're modeling, it can take 4 models, maybe 100 photographs of each, to get one figure in one position. And I handle them. I put their hair behind their ears. I move straps. I hold fingers. I have them hold something. I tell them what to think and what to feel. Go to this memory in your life. Imagine if it could have been different. Be there and remember, what was the wallpaper like? What was the weather like that day? Until they get the look in the eyes and the atmosphere that I had in mind for that painting. And in this way, everything has to be congruent perspective and a congruent lighting for that painting. I'm walking out on some kind of promontory, it seems. A stiff wind and impossibly grey. There certainly was a boy, long gone, swallowed now into lost loves and lost hopes. The dusk coming on soundlessly across the land. Is this what they call alchemy? An infinitesimally small speck in the landscape. And born out of those footsteps on the stairs, those paradoxes of passion, and the blade swinging and swinging down the years on its dwindling thread, came visions of euphoria, vast symphonies, a poetry of ordinary mortality, the quiet and relentless tapping and trickling, the sweet blood of a little boy, appropriately transformed into play, the monastic repetition descending towards the waves in dying light of painting for the returning man. These paintings are a huge stack of devices. You know all the research on every object and on the clothing and on the model and everything else and the patterns and the table. You know the research on that. But then it is built, and the table is flattened up against the surface of the canvas. Not actually in a modernist cubist way, but in an early Renaissance or pre-Renaissance way, like the early religious paintings, where tables were flat to the canvas. And I want that kind of honesty. So the floor, the walls in the paintings, the tables are all perfectly flat to take on the honest flatness of the canvas. Then everything else is built into that, because then I begin to basically tell a pack of lies. And the lies I tell are that I try to imitate the textures of the skin and the objects in the painting sufficiently closely that they carry the emotional charge and they carry the memory. That is what I want. I want them to be so authentic and just to lie their heads off, pretending to be what they are not, when in fact it's paint on cloth. For me, though, these paintings are objects on walls, with long roots tunneling down into my memories. The paint still leaks the distinct smell of my father's cigarettes, curling out of the dark of his workshop, where he remains on his hands and knees, blinking the smoke out of his eyes and making my first easel. Birth behind him, and death walking an arm's length ahead of him, his footsteps on the stairs, going up to the bathroom, the chuckle of water against the hull of his boat, and the distant sound of moorhens calling across the water.
Edward!
Coming.